Hello, my name is Neal with the Garrett Public Library with this week's Railroader Reading. I've selected excerpts from the book Inferno by author Dan Brown. Harvard professor of symbology Robert Langdon, recovering from Viantha the assassin's attempt on his life, is currently being chased by both her and the authorities. From the hospital he woke up in, a young, mysterious woman, Dr. Sienna Brooks, is assisting him in unveiling what's going on, discovering historical clues on the run. Without warning, Sienna scrambled to her feet. "We should go," she said. "It won't take long for them to figure out we're not in the costume gallery." Langdon stood up with her. "Yes, but go? Where? Vatican City?" "I beg your pardon?" "I finally figured out what you meant before. What Vatican City has in common with the Boboli Gardens." She mentioned in the direction of the little gray door. "That's the entrance, right?" Langdon managed a nod. "Actually, that's the exit, but I figured it was worth a shot. Unfortunately, we can't get through." Langdon had heard enough of the guard's exchange with the soldier to know this doorway was not an option. "But if we could get through," Sienna said, a hint of mischief returning to her voice, "do you know what that would mean?" A faint smile now crossed her lips. "It would mean that twice today you and I have been helped by the same Renaissance artist." Langdon had to chuckle, having had the same thought a few minutes ago. Vasari, Vasari. Sienna grinned more broadly now, and Langdon sensed she had forgiven him, at least for the moment. "I think it's a sign from above," she declared, sounding half serious. "We should go through that door." "Okay, and we'll just march right past the guard." Sienna cracked her knuckles and headed out of the grotto. "No, I'll have a word with him." She glanced back at Langdon, the fire returning to her eyes. "Trust me, Professor, I can be quite persuasive when I have to be." The pounding on the little gray door had returned, firm and relentless. Security guard Ernesto Russo grumbled in frustration. The strange, cold-eyed soldier was apparently back, but his timing could not have been worse. The televised football match was in overtime, with Fiorentina a man short and hanging by a thread. The pounding continued. Ernesto was no fool. He knew there was some kind of trouble out there this morning, all the sirens and soldiers, but he had never been one to involve himself in matters that didn't affect him directly. Pazzo I culi che bada a fatti altrui. Then again, the soldier was clearly someone of importance, and ignoring him was probably unwise. Jobs in Italy were hard to find these days, even boring ones. Stealing a last glance at the game, Ernesto headed off toward the pounding on the door. He still couldn't believe he was paid to sit in his tiny office all day and watch television. Perhaps twice a day, a VIP tour would arrive outside the space. Having walked all the way from the Uffizi Gallery, Ernesto would greet them, unlock the middle grate, and permit the group to pass through to the little gray door, where their tour would end in the Boboli Gardens. Now, as the pounding grew more intense, Ernesto opened the steel grate, moved through it, and then closed and locked it behind him. "See?" he shouted above the sounds of pounding as he hurried to the gray door. No reply. The pounding continued. "Insomma," he finally unlocked the door and pulled it open, expecting to see the same lifeless gaze from a moment ago. But the face at the door was far more attractive. "Ciao," a pretty blonde woman said, smiling sweetly at him. She held out a folded piece of paper, which he instinctively reached out to accept. In the instant he grasped the paper and realized it was nothing but a piece of trash off the ground, the woman seized his wrist with her slender hands and plunged a thumb into the bony carpal area just beneath the palm of his hand. Ernesto felt as if a knife had just severed his wrist. The slicing stab was followed by an electric numbness. The woman stepped toward him, and the pressure increased exponentially, starting the pain cycle all over again. He staggered backward, trying to pull his arm free, but his legs went numb and buckled beneath him, and he slumped to his knees. The rest happened in an instant. A tall man in a dark suit appeared in the open doorway, slipped inside, and quickly closed the gray door behind him. Ernesto reached for his radio, but a soft hand behind his neck squeezed once, and his muscles seized up, leaving him gasping for breath. The woman took the radio as the tall man approached, looking as alarmed by her actions as Ernesto was. Dim mak, the blonde said casually to the tall man. Chinese pressure points. There's a reason they've been around for 3 millennia. The man watched in wonder. Non vogliamo farte del male. The woman whispered to Ernesto, easing the pressure on his neck. We don't want to hurt you. The instant the pressure decreased, Ernesto tried to twist free, but the pressure promptly returned, and his muscles seized again. He gasped in pain, barely able to breathe. Dobbiamo passare, she said. We need to get through. She motioned to the steel grate, which Ernesto had thankfully locked behind him. Dove la chiave? Non se liho, he managed. I don't have the key. The tall man advanced past them to the grating and examined the mechanism. It's a combination lock, he called back to the woman, his accent American. The woman knelt down next to Ernesto, her brown eyes like ice. ¿Cuál es la combinación? She demanded. Non posso, he replied. I'm not permitted. Something happened at the top of his spine, and Ernesto felt his entire body go limp. An instant later, he blacked out. Il Corridoio Vasariano, the Vasari Corridor, was designed by Giorgio Vasari in 1564, under orders of the Medici ruler, Grand Duke Cosimo I, to provide safe passage from his residence at the Pitti Palace to his administrative offices, across the Arno River and Palazzo Vecchio. Similar to Vatican City's famed Passetto, the Vasari Corridor was the quintessential secret passageway. It stretched nearly a full kilometer from the eastern corner of the Boboli Gardens to the heart of the old palace itself, crossing the Ponte Vecchio and snaking through the Uffizi Garden in between. Nowadays, the Vasari Corridor still served as a safe haven, although not for Medici aristocrats, but for artwork. With its seemingly endless expanse of secure wall space, the corridor was home to countless rare paintings, overflow from the world-famous Uffizi Gallery, through which the corridor passed. Langdon had traveled the passageway a few years before, as part of a leisurely private tour. On that afternoon, he had paused to admire the corridor's mind-boggling array of paintings, including the most extensive collection of self-portraits in the world. He had also stopped several times to peer out of the corridor's occasional viewing portals, which permitted travelers to gauge their progress along the elevated walkway. This morning, however, Langdon and Siena were moving through the corridor at a run, eager to put as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers at the other end. Langdon wondered how long it would take for the bound guard to be discovered. As the tunnel stretched out before them, Langdon sensed it leading them closer with every step to what they were searching for. Cerca trova, the eyes of death, and an answer as to who is chasing me. The distant whine of the surveillance drone was far behind them. The farther they progressed into the tunnel, the more Langdon was reminded of just how ambitious an architectural feat this passageway had been. Elevated above the city for nearly its entire length, the Vasari Corridor was like a broad serpent, snaking through the buildings, all the way from the Pitti Palace, across the Arno, into the heart of old Florence. The narrow, whitewashed passageway seemed to stretch for eternity, occasionally turning briefly left or right to avoid an obstacle, but always moving east, across the Arno. The sudden sound of voices echoed ahead of them in the corridor, and Siena skidded to a stop. Langdon halted too, and immediately placed a calm hand on her shoulder, motioning to a nearby viewing portal. Tourists down below. Langdon and Siena moved to the portal and peered out, seeing that they were currently perched above the Ponte Vecchio, the medieval stone bridge that serves as a pedestrian walkway into the old city below them. The day's first tourists were enjoying the market that has been held on the bridge since the 1400s. Today, the vendors are mostly goldsmiths and jewelers, but that has not always been the case. Originally, the bridge had been home to Florence's vast open-air meat market, but the butchers were banished in 1593 after the rancid odor of spoiled meat had wafted up into the Vasari corridor and assaulted the delicate nostrils of the Grand Duke. Down there on the bridge somewhere, Langdon recalled, was the precise spot where one of Florence's most famous crimes had been committed. In 1216, a young nobleman named Buondelmonte had rejected his family's arranged marriage for the sake of his true love, and for that decision he was brutally killed on this very bridge. His death, long considered Florence's bloodiest murder, was so named because it had triggered a rift between two powerful political factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, who had then waged war ruthlessly for centuries against each other. Because the ensuing political feud had brought about Dante's exile from Florence, the poet had bitterly immortalized the event in his Divine Comedy. O Bundulatmente, through another's counsel, you fled your wedding pledge and brought such evil. To this day, 3 separate plaques, each quoting a different line from Canto 16 of Dante's Paradiso, could be found near the murder site. One of them was situated at the mouth of the Ponte Vecchio and ominously declared, "But Florence, in her final piece, was fated to offer up into that mutilated stone guardian upon her bridge a victim." Langdon raised his eyes, now from the bridge the murky waters, it spanned. Off to the east, the lone spire of Palazzo Vecchio beckoned. Even though Langdon and Siena were only halfway across the Arno River, he had no doubt they had long since passed the point of no return. 30 feet below, on the cobblestones of the Ponte Vecchio, Viantha anxiously scanned the oncoming crowd, never imagining that her only redemption had, just moments before, passed directly overhead. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the intrigue as I did. Until we virtually meet again, over and out.